Hello, fellow funeral professionals. Welcome to the National Funeral Directors Association Conference right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is in your father's funeral industry, boys. It's 1902, and things, they are a-changin'. We're phasing out arsenic in the embalming fluid. It turns out it was killing us, so not using that anymore. But more important, we have got to keep the chemical preservation of our dead human bodies relevant here in these United States. And thankfully, we've got some visionaries here among us. Go big or go funeral home. That's what I say. Okay, let's gather everybody around, and I would like to introduce you boys to one of the most spectacular things the industry has ever seen.
Do you mean all these body parts?
What? Oh, you're talking about the over 50 embalmed body parts displayed behind me? I know what you're thinking. That's wild. No, that's not even what's happening. That's just the backdrop. Who I brought you to meet is this man.
Who is that? He looks a little unwell.
But gentlemen, this man is the future of death. The piece de resistance. The living dead. The casket last season. Unnecessary. That, gentlemen, is Bizka-Man.
Bizka-Man.
That is real? That happened. It seems strange to be saying this, but in the last 15 years, a lifelike embalmed body, a dead person who has been propped up in an interesting position, is not that hard to find. So-called extreme embalming happens in New Orleans with the funerals of Mickey Easterling, Lionel Batiste, Miriam Burbank, and Renard Matthews. It was popularized in Puerto Rico with the funerals of David Morales Colon, Christopher Rivera, Renato Garcia, Victor Perez Cardona, Henry Rosario Martinez, Angel Pantoja Medina, Omar Aguayo, Fernando de Jesus. Then there was Che Lewis in Trinidad and Tobago, and Bill Stanley in Mutual, Ohio. But over a century ago, there was the forefather of them all. There was Bizka-Man.
Bizka-Man.
At the 1902 National Funeral Directors Conference, in the center of an exhibit of over 50 embalmed body parts, a man sat stoically. He wore a dapper suit, legs jauntily crossed, the picture of upward mobility. One small thing, the man was dead, chemically preserved, with Bizka embalming fluid. The funeral trade journal The Casket called Bizka-Man one of the most remarkable specimens of embalming ever produced in this country. The buzz at the conference was that Bizka-Man looked alive. It gave people a glimpse into what death could look like. Nothing like death at all. Who was Bizka-Man?
Bizka-Man.
Who made Bizka-Man?
Bizka-Man.
And what does his existence say about death and the American funeral industry? To understand Bizka-Man, we have to understand the year 1902. Other than as the year that air conditioning was invented, I love air conditioning. I know that makes me bad. Lock me up in a cold, cold cell.
Guilty.
Through most of the 19th century, and frankly, most of human history, preparation of the dead body was done at home, where the person died. The dead person's mouth would be closed in a non-intrusive way, with a cloth wrapped under the chin and tied atop the head. Coins or bags of salt were placed on the eyelids to weigh them down and close them before rigor mortis set in. The body would be shrouded, and if you wanted to keep the body around longer, you could slow decomposition by placing chunks of ice beneath the body. This was performed by members of the household or community, usually women. In rural areas, this form of body care lasted well into the 20th century. Ozark magic and folklore talks about the
veritable mania for washing dead bodies. The moment a death occurs, the neighbors strip the corpse and begin to scrub it vigorously.
I can't even get my neighbors to water my plants when I'm out of town. Times they have changed. This way of presenting a dead body is not trying to deny death. The untreated dead body is going to grow cold, it's going to grow stiff, it's going to look dead. But in the second half of the 19th century, the American Civil War changed how we do death forever. Can I get like a Ken Burns montage here, please?
Dearest mother, the husbands and sons of the North have been sent away to fight and die by the hundreds of thousands. I know that if I should die, your fondest wish would be to see my mortal frame once more, and give your son a proper burial. Father will not be able to afford to send me home in a sealed metal coffin. In my honor, hire one of these embalmers, who shall preserve my corpse with sawdust and arsenic, sending me home to Hugh once more. Your son, Buford.
Being an embalmer on the Civil War battlefield, preserving the dead and sending them back home, meant big profits. Thomas Holmes, known as the father of modern embalming, claimed to have embalmed over 4,000 bodies during the war. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but still, he was out there preserving and prospering. By the end of the war, Holmes was charging $100 per corpse, which is about $2,000 a corpse in today's money. But embalmers had their critics, who thought these men, who were supposed to be noble caretakers of the dead, were acting too much like businessmen. Families claimed embalmers held on to bodies for ransom and were surrounded by impenetrable secrecy, charging extortionist prices. After 4 brutal years, the war was over. To be clear, preservative embalming was a useful technology if you needed to transfer a body hundreds or thousands of miles. But after the war, such travel would only be needed in special cases. Caring for the dead body could return to its place in the home, facilitated not by professionals, but by the women in their community. And that's exactly what happened. Which is why today, funerals are inexpensive and we're all very comfortable with the dead human body. It's not what happened. It's not what happened. The men who cared for the dead on the battlefield had gotten a whiff of that sweet, sweet embalming fluid, which they should not have been whiffing. It was definitely poison, and the income that it provided. In order to keep this career, they would need to convince the general public of embalming's enduring value, reframe and rebrand embalming as something everyone needed. Enter the era of the embalmer bro.
So,
Think hustle-focused entrepreneurs of, say, cryptocurrency, or flipping Airbnbs, or growing your social media following, but for the preservation of a corpse. These men were showmen.
Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
Traveling to conferences and exhibitions with their latest, greatest version of injecting carbolic acid into arteries, selling fluids with names like Crane's Electrodynamic Mummifier. Then the schools began. Embalming schools were started and run by the same people who were selling embalming chemicals. Training embalmers was thus a borderline pyramid scheme, a LuLaRoe for arsenic.
We are creating confidence.
Classes lasted several days to several weeks, with names like F.A. Sullivan's Oriental School of Embalming. Not every name can age well. They moved from town to town across America and grew a legion of new embalmers. It was these itinerant teachers, wrote James Farrell in Inventing the American Way of Death, that created the biggest change in how we still care for our dead bodies today. These were funeral directors who, quote, placed profit on the bottom line of their rising professions. So probably 10 years ago, I sat at a conference table in Hollywood across from a high-level television executive talking about a death-themed television show that never happened. At the end of the day, I was like, I don't need to be on television. Like, I want to dress like a turn-of-the-century Wisconsin resident in front of a green screen.
so,
That is my art. The executive expressed to me her fear that the way I talked about embalming would make me unpopular with middle America.
People don't want their religion dismissed like that.
She explained. I was legitimately confused. Their religion?
You know, the way you speak out against Christian funerals, the embalming, the caskets, the whole thing.
I think there might be a misunderstanding, I replied. Embalming isn't a Christian practice, it's a capitalist practice. I know many modern funeral directors who see their job as a calling, and they genuinely want to help people. Funeral directing is a hard job. But that doesn't change the whole economic foundation of the funeral industry, which did not begin as,
Gosh, just a way to help people.
it was in this group of men where we find the man who would create Bizcoman.
Bizcoman.
One of the greatest to ever do it, arguably the king of the embalmer bros, Carl Lewis Barnes.
so,
Carl Lewis Barnes was born in Connellsville, Pennsylvania in 1872, the son of a successful undertaker. Undertaking was a family business, but Barnes had higher ambitions than following his dad's footsteps as a small-town funeral director. He graduated from the Medical College of Indiana in 1892, specializing in surgery of the eye, ear, nose, and throat. I bet getting your eyes operated on in 1892 was so fun. Barnes went to work with his brothers making disinfectants and, you guessed it, running embalming schools. This is where Barnes really hit his stride. He started the Barnes School of Sanitary Science and Embalming, while his brother Thornton was the director of the U.S. Chemical Company's embalming school in New York. Now, Barnes fancied himself an experimenter. He x-rayed his own arm to compare it to a cadaver arm. This is really him here. He experimented on dissected lungs. He tried everything, wrote textbooks about it, and had so many ideas for new embalming fluids and techniques.
When you add tannin, gum benzoin, and eucalyptus to this mixture, it will not only increase its preserving qualities, it will give everything a pleasant odor, which will fill the atmosphere in the vicinity of the body.
Like a corpse Yankee candle. Thanks, Carl.
Sup?
Barnes was full of tips and tricks.
If you want to check that the preservative solution has fully penetrated the tissues, I suggest a needle puncture in the bottom of the feet or a scalpel puncture in the muscular parts of the toes. If you've embalmed properly, arterial fluid will escape right out of these punctures or openings.
In the late 1800s, the most popular method of embalming, according to Barnes, was arterial embalming through the brachial artery. That is, injecting the body with a preservative fluid through the artery midway between the armpit and elbow, which would disperse through the circulatory system and fix the tissues. F.A. Sullivan, the guy who had started the Oriental School of Embalming, claimed that he had a method better than arterial embalming, called the needle process, where you stuck hollow needles in the corner of each eye and pumped the fluid through the dead person's head. Barnes is like, no, I've tried this. Don't go right through the eyes. It makes them swell like little balloons, bulge out. It's a very freaky look on a dead person. So Barnes created the Barnes needle process, where he went in also with a hollow needle, but not through the eyes, through the back of the neck and up into the head. If the embalming fluid didn't disperse down to all the limbs, the body would need to be hung up, sort of like meat. But are we not all meat? If we're being honest. Yes, Barnes was an experimenter. But in his extremely influential book, The Art and Science of Embalming, Barnes revealed how he saw himself and his profession.
If I should be asked what constitutes a funeral director, I would answer a thorough gentleman. A gentleman today, a gentleman tomorrow. He should not exchange his role for any other part in life's drama.
This is sort of an ironic statement from Carl because, let me be clear, Barnes lived for the drama. His next move was to prop up a dead man, surround him with body parts, and take him on the road.
Biscuitman.
That's drama! Honey, drama! For the embalmer bro, there are 3 foundational beliefs of embalming. 1, that it preserves the body, slowing down decomposition. 2, that it disinfects the body, making it safer. And 3, that it restores the body, giving it a more attractive, lifelike appearance. Barnes was a true believer in all 3 tenets of embalming. But remember, Barnes is competing against a saturated market. By the 1890s, there are many popular embalming fluids available. Most used arsenic and alcohol in their recipe. But by the turn of the century, arsenic was understood to be deadly to the embalmer. And by the early 1900s, the states had started prohibiting its use in embalming fluid. A new preservative was needed, and the preservative heir apparent was formaldehyde. But there were problems. Formaldehyde had been used to disinfect and preserve the dead body and various fluids for decades, but embalmers weren't convinced. Mainly because formaldehyde would tan the skin like leather, making it dry and hard and prone to cracking. If too much was pumped into the body, it discolored the body, making the blood look bluish black. Barnes was attempting to create an embalming fluid that used formaldehyde but did not discolor the body and give it that hard, leathery appearance. Here's a real advertisement.
Bodies embalmed by us never turn black.
And with the creation of Bizka embalming fluid, Barnes claimed to have cracked it.
After 3 years, I was finally able to produce a chemical which would not only remove discoloration, if present, but would also combine with the dark discolored blood and restore it to a natural color, thus giving the body a perfectly lifelike appearance.
Don't ask me, by the way, what the word Bizka means. I've really looked into it. I cannot find it. I think it's like Google. It's an embalmer, bro.
So,
I think it's like Zingo, Twingo, Bango, like, you know, like a tech company. As far as foundational embalming belief number 1 goes, preservation of the dead body, Bizka fluid was a success. I mean, Bizka man was sitting there months after death, ready to receive a room of embalmers and funeral directors. It was clear that the technology had arrived to resist decomposition.
Wait until the mercury reaches 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, then you'll wish you had some Bizka. These conditions, wrote scholar John Troyer, made death highly profitable for the industries turning the dead body into an unfettered source of capital. A normal corpse, not embalmed, was a bit of a wild card. Decomposition, especially without refrigerating the body, leaves the corpse prone to decay and smells after the first few days. You have to bury the body relatively quickly. But now the corpse could hang out, as Bizka man did, as long as it takes for him to earn money for the new funeral industry. He could even go on tour. Philip Aries, in one of the most influential works on death of all time, wrote that death was not actual or absolute until the onset of decomposition. By delaying decomposition, one delayed absolute death. Bizka man, whoever he was given a chance for longer life. Though I question whether, when someone says they wish to live longer, they mean just their skin and hair. It's sort of the opposite of uploading your brain into the cloud or cryopreserving your head in a jar. It's not extending your thoughts and personality, but just your mortal flesh outfit.
Don't be scared of me.
But what about principle number 2? Did Bizka embalming fluid make the dead body safer? Barnes certainly believed it did, but embalming has long since been debunked by the CDC and the World Health Organization as having public health benefit, so we'll set that aside. But the real question, for you, for me, for Barnes, is principle 3, an aesthetic judgment. Did embalming with Bizka fluid make a dead body look better? For his part, Barnes believed the time for taking care of the corpse at home was over. Don't put the white sheet around the body, don't close the mouth, don't close the eyes with the little bags of salt.
Do away with these ghastly customs that were in vogue half a century ago. These things horrify even the immediate relatives. It's possible to make the dead more companionable and less repulsive.
Little bags of salt on the eyes are so horrifying you made Bizka man?
Bizka man.
Now, again, whether or not Bizka man is what you want in your dead person is a personal aesthetic judgment. For my personal advocacy, I believe there are strong benefits to a body looking dead. It allows you to accept the reality of the death, see the transition of a living person to a dead one, and engage in real time with the exit of someone you loved out of your life. But Bizka was embalming taking to its logical, if extreme, conclusion. John Troyer again.
The Bizka man was also the perfect human model for the most powerful promise made by 19th century embalming and preservation. Dead bodies could suddenly appear unnaturally alive.
Carl Lewis Barnes was basically this guy. Now, this person and I have very different advocacies around death, but ever since I saw a comment saying he's basically living his life as a Victorian era weirdo, he makes so much more sense to me. He is Carl Lewis Barnes. We recognize him not because he's a man of the future, but because he's a man of the past.
So,
Bizka also became a model of the new corpse capitalism. If you have a dead person lying shrouded in a house while you watch them grow cold and dead and transition out of life, there's nothing to sell there. You can die, have a wake, and be buried in a local cemetery for free or for a small fee. But with Bizka, you can sell an entire experience. You can exist in the capitalist system and continue to make money after your death by being preserved and made to look lifelike and sold back to your family as a product, even when you're a corpse. You would think the live Bizka Man display in Wisconsin would be the end for him. But Barnes was not against using another emerging preservation technology on this body. In the 1903 edition of the Sunny Side, that's another funeral trade magazine, there was an advertisement, full page. Right on the page was, once again, Bizka Man, ladies and gentlemen. He had been photographed, meaning he'd now last indefinitely for the purpose of advertising.
Embalmed with Bizka embalming fluid. Picture taken 3 months after death.
Bizka Man becomes a sort of 1900s funeral industry Geico Gecko or Flo from Progressive. Barnes had both a mascot and a proof of concept for his groundbreaking fluid. In the advertisement, Barnes names a litany of funeral directors who sing the fluid's praises. And towards the end of the ad, he makes this rather grim selling point.
If you saw the fluid, remove the discolorations from the face and neck of a man who hanged himself, wouldn't that make you think you would like to have some?
That escalates so quickly. The fluid, writes Barnes, could easily be acquired by writing a postcard to the United States Chemical Company in Chicago. Or, better yet, attend one of his upcoming exhibits of specimens in Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Boston, New York City, or Buffalo. We know what Bizka Man represented, but there is something we haven't addressed. Who was this dead body? Who was this man in life? Barnes briefly mentioned the Bizka corpse in a lecture to funeral directors he gave a few years later in 1905. Barnes brought up a man who died of tuberculosis, because the man was in the category of difficult cases, such as decomposed bodies or disease-ravaged bodies. Barnes had trouble injecting the fluid into his body.
The best case I ever treated was a failure at the start. The body was that of a young man, about 30 years of age. I used a picture of this subject in advertising 3 months after death. The body would have gone to pieces in 3 days if it had not been so treated.
All we know is that the man was in his 30s, dead of a terrible disease. But how did he end up with Barnes? What family is like, we could bury Jeffrey, or
we could give him to the embalmer man and make him a star?
Oh, we must. We simply must.
This is where things get a little dark. Scholar Jani Scandura argued that the anonymous nature of Bizka's identity reveals a more ominous truth. Though Bizka's corpse was presented dressed as a gentleman, if he ended up experimented on in this way, the body, quote, most certainly belonged to an individual who had been destitute. He simply was remade to appear middle class after death. That is to say, Bizka Man was a kind of post-mortem cosplay of a gentleman, though his actual life was likely one of financial difficulty and strife. Barnes, as the costumer and makeup artist to the dead, knew that corpses had no essential class identity beneath their prettified appearance. Bizka Man was an influencer. In his way.
Passive income while I sleep, bro.
A promise that in death, you can appear to be affluent, of a certain social status. If the corpse is now a product being manufactured, why can't the buyer control its image? We don't know what the Bizka Man would have said about his fate. He might have been horrified, but he also might have been like,
"You're gonna do what? That is the craziest thing I have ever heard. Let's go, brah, nice."
You might think my opinion on Bizka is the same as my opinion on modern extreme embalmings, and that is not true. Bizka's inability to choose his fate and postmortem presentation is in many ways the complete opposite of modern extreme embalming. Extreme embalmings I view as almost a protest against the cookie-cutter nature of the modern funeral, where the dead are often rotated through the same caskets, same suits, same organ rendition of My Way. These embalmings and their poses are radical declarations of individuality, decided by the families and the person who has died. They use the technology of preservation not to extend life, but to create a tableau that honors the dead. So what happened to Carl Lewis Barnes?
So?
Well, Bizka embalming fluid had a naughty little secret. Though Barnes claimed there was no arsenic in his embalming fluid, which, remember, was largely banned, by 1906, a chemistry professor in Philadelphia found that there was indeed arsenic in Barnes' magical biscuit fluid. The fluid could no longer be sold. Barnes leaned back into formaldehyde and by 1908 patented a process of embalming that involved
filling the larger cavities of the body with a formaldehyde solution of water and alcohol.
And while this wasn't his miraculous biscuit fluid that appeared to make the dead alive, he was still at the leading edge of embalmers embracing formaldehyde, and thus secured himself a role in the evolution of embalming, where Barnes is still very respected today, at least in mortuary schools and embalming circles. I don't think the general public has a favorite embalmer. I know that most of my audience, just statistically, is going to choose an unembalmed home wake, or a simple green burial, or cremation, or human composting. But humor me. If you were going to go the full bizka, get embalmed in this way, what would your final memory picture be? What are you wearing? What's the setup? What's the location? What's the theme? Let me have it.
I'm AI Carl Lewis Barnes, back from the dead to sell you something. I love selling something. It's Caitlin's Patreon. Bodies embalmed by her Patreon never turn black. Wait until the mercury reaches 90 degrees Fahrenheit, then you'll wish you had some Caitlin's Patreon. You support the making of these videos, her Titanic book, which doesn't have a release date, stop asking, she's doing her best, and patron-only content. This month, she talked about a woman whose dog puked up toes of their former owner, and she tried to sell the toes on the black market. Huh, I guess old Carl Lewis isn't looking so weird anymore, is he?
Carl Lewis Barnes here. Hello. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed everything about it. And I hope when you pass away that you consider the Carl Lewis Barnes method of embalming. Yes, biscuit fluid may contain arsenic. And yes, it may be terrible for the embalmer, but you'll already be dead. You're gonna look great. You won't have that leathery and waxen complexion. Now, take a look at some of these modern embalming, these extreme embalmings. Yes, they look great. They're dramatic. It's an expression of one's life in death. However, they look pretty waxy, whereas Biscuit Man looks as fresh today as he did the day he was injected with arsenic-rich biscuit fluid. Well, if that's not something you're interested in, then perhaps you might be interested in eye surgery. I do perform modern techniques, modern surgeries like LASIK. Now look, or don't. I may use tools from the 1900s, but it's more bespoke that way. You'll see in a way that no one else will see. Guaranteed. That's the Carl Lewis Barnes promise, and that's the Carl Lewis Barnes way. Well, I guess I'd better be on my way. I am dead after all, so I can't actually fulfill any of these promises, but what I can do is tell you, I lived a great life. I lived a life of a maverick embalmer. And had I been alive today, well, who knows, I might have run for president.
Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs.
Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur. Hustle-focused entrepreneurs. Entrepreneur.
He's the man, he's the man, he's the man who looked like a man. He sat in front of 50 several body parts. He looked like he was a rich man, but he probably was a poor man. Poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man. Who are you, biscuit man? Poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man. Who are you, biscuit man? Poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man. Who are you, biscuit man? Poor biscuit man, poor biscuit man. Poor biscuit man. Who are you, biscuit man?